I am Chauncey, 68 years old, and retired from the business I built with my own two hands in Boston. Throughout my life, I valued family bonds far more than the wealth I accumulated. Never did I imagine my only son Jackson would publicly humiliate me, treating me like hired help at a fancy restaurant. The $380,000 I had saved for his future weighed heavy on my mind that night. What happened next changed everything between us forever. Before I share what happened that night, let me know where you are watching from. Hit that like button if you have ever had to teach someone a tough lesson about respect. Looking back at my life, I never had anything handed to me. I grew up in a small apartment on the outskirts of Boston, the son of a factory worker and a seamstress. My father taught me the value of hard work, waking up at 4:30 every morning for 30 years without complaint. My mother showed me how to stretch every dollar until it screamed. Those lessons formed the foundation of who I became. When I was 19, I started working at a local hardware store, learning everything I could about the business. By 25, I had saved enough to open my own small shop. It was nothing fancy, just a narrow storefront with uneven floors and flickering lights, but it was mine. Over the next 40 years, I grew that single store into a chain of 12 locations across Massachusetts. We never became Home Depot, but we built a reputation for quality and service that made me proud. I met Martha in my early 30s, when she came into my store looking for supplies to fix her leaking bathroom sink. She had this determined look in her eyes, refusing to call a plumber for something she believed she could learn to do herself. I admired that spirit immediately. We married 6 months later, and she became my partner in every sense of the word. She handled the books while I managed operations. Together, we built not just a business, but a life. Jackson came along when we were both 37, a bit later than we had planned. Martha had struggled with infertility for years, so when she finally became pregnant, it felt like a miracle. From the moment I held him, I promised myself he would have every opportunity I never had. Unlike my childhood of secondhand clothes and public school education, Jackson grew up comfortable. We lived in a nice 4-bedroom house in a good neighborhood. He attended private schools where teachers gave him individual attention. Every summer, we took family vacations to places I had only seen in magazines as a kid. Martha and I worked hard to give him these things, but we also tried to instill the values that had served us well: hard work, honesty, and respect for others, regardless of their station in life. When Jackson decided to attend Northeastern University to study business, I proudly paid his tuition in full. No student loans for my boy. I wanted him to graduate debt-free, ready to make his mark on the world. He did well in school, showing a natural aptitude for marketing that impressed his professors. After graduation, I offered him a position in our company, but he wanted to forge his own path. I respected that decision, even as I secretly hoped he might someday take over the family business. 5 years ago, Martha was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer. Within 6 months, I lost my wife of 33 years, my business partner, and my best friend. Jackson was supportive during her illness, visiting often and helping me navigate the complex medical terminology and treatment options. After she passed, though, something changed. He became more distant, calling less frequently and shortening our visits. I understood grief affects everyone differently, so I gave him space to process his loss. 2 years after Martha died, Jackson met Heather at a charity fundraiser in downtown Boston. She came from the kind of old money family that has buildings named after them at universities. Her father, Lawrence, managed a hedge fund, and her mother, Sylvia, served on the boards of several prestigious cultural institutions. From the beginning, I sensed they viewed me as somewhat quaint, a blue-collar success story that was charming, but not quite up to their standards. Despite my misgivings, I was happy to see Jackson in love. When they announced their engagement, after dating for just 8 months, I threw them a beautiful party at one of Boston's finest restaurants. I remember Heather commenting that it was nice, but not quite what she was used to. I smiled and nodded, determined to be supportive. The wedding was an elaborate affair that cost more than our first house. I contributed generously, wanting Jackson to have the celebration he desired. During the reception, I noticed I had been seated at a table far from the wedding party with some distant cousins and work acquaintances rather than at the family table. When I mentioned it to Jackson, he said it was just a mistake with the seating chart, but I saw Heather exchange a look with her mother. After they married, the changes in Jackson became more pronounced. He moved into Heather's luxury condo in Back Bay and began dressing differently, trading his casual style for tailored suits and designer watches. He joined the same country club as Heather's parents and took up golf, a sport he had previously mocked as boring and pretentious. Whenever we met for lunch, which became increasingly rare, he would check his phone constantly and find reasons to cut our time short. What Jackson did not know was that since his birth, Martha and I had been putting money aside for him. Initially, it was a college fund, but when I covered his education from our business proceeds, we kept the account growing as a nest egg for his future. After Martha passed, I continued adding to it, eventually accumulating $380,000. I had planned to give it to him as a surprise for his 35th birthday, just 3 weeks away, to help with a down payment on a house. Despite his changed attitude, he was still my son, and I wanted to give him this gift that Martha and I had planned together. There were warning signs I chose to ignore, like when he invited me to his new office and introduced me to his colleagues as someone who owned a hardware store, completely diminishing the business empire I had built. Or when I offered to help them move into their new condo, and he suggested I just hire movers for them instead of coming myself. Each incident stung, but I made excuses for his behavior, blaming stress or Heather's influence, rather than confronting the growing disrespect. When Jackson called to invite me to dinner with Heather and her parents, I felt hopeful. Perhaps this was a chance to strengthen our bond, to find our way back to the close relationship we once shared. Maybe they had finally started seeing me as family. I spent the entire week looking forward to that dinner, even buying a new shirt and getting a haircut for the occasion. How wrong I was about what that evening would bring. The day of the dinner arrived, and I felt genuinely excited. This was the first time Jackson had initiated a family gathering since the wedding 2 years ago. I took extra care getting ready, putting on my new blue button-down shirt and the good slacks Martha had insisted I buy for special occasions. I even dabbed on a bit of the cologne Jackson had given me last Christmas, which still sat mostly unused on my bathroom counter. Jackson had selected Antoine's, one of the most exclusive restaurants in Boston. The kind of place with no prices on the menu and waiters who look like they might have law degrees. I arrived 15 minutes early, not wanting to keep anyone waiting. The maitre d' gave me a once-over as I approached the podium, his expression suggesting I had wandered in by mistake. "I am here for the Thornton party," I said, using Heather's family name as Jackson had instructed me. "I believe the reservation is for 7 o'clock. "Ah, yes," he replied, his tone shifting slightly. "The rest of your party has not yet arrived. Would you care to wait at the bar?" I sat at the bar nursing a club soda, watching the door. At 7:20, they finally arrived, all together. Jackson, Heather, and her parents swept in like they owned the place. Lawrence Thornton, a tall man with silver hair and the confident posture of someone who has never worried about money, led the group. His wife Sylvia, thin and elegant in an outfit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, surveyed the restaurant with a critical eye. Heather, a carbon copy of her mother but 30 years younger, kept her hand possessively on Jackson's arm. My son spotted me and waved casually, as if I were an acquaintance rather than his father. I stood up, perhaps too eagerly, and made my way over to them. "There you are, Dad," Jackson said, giving me a quick, perfunctory hug. "You remember Lawrence and Sylvia, right?" "Of course," I smiled, extending my hand. "It is good to see you both again." Lawrence shook my hand with a limp grip. "Charles, was it?" "Chauncey," I corrected gently. Right. The hardware man." We were shown to our table, a prime spot near the windows, overlooking the city lights. I noticed with a sinking feeling that I was seated at the far end, almost as an afterthought. Jackson sat between Heather and her mother, with Lawrence at the head of the table. I was positioned at the opposite end, next to an empty chair that would have been Martha's place in another lifetime. The conversation began with Lawrence discussing his recent acquisition of a competing hedge fund. Sylvia chimed in with details about the charity gala she was organizing. Heather talked about their plans to vacation in the south of France next month. Jackson nodded along, occasionally adding comments that showcased his new knowledge of wines or European travel destinations. I sat quietly, feeling increasingly invisible. When I attempted to join the conversation, mentioning a news article I had read about market trends, Lawrence gave me a bemused look. "That is a rather simplistic take on a complex issue," he said, before turning back to Jackson to continue their discussion. The waiter arrived to take our orders. Everyone else requested elaborate dishes with confident pronunciation of French terms. When my turn came, I simply ordered the steak, medium well. "The fillet is best served medium rare, sir," the waiter suggested. Before I could respond, Jackson interjected, "He will have it medium rare." Then to me, with a condescending smile, "Trust me, Dad, you do not know what you are missing." I felt a flush of embarrassment but nodded agreement. It was a small thing, but it set the tone for what was to come. As appetizers arrived, Lawrence asked for the peppermill. Instead of calling over the waiter, Jackson turned to me. "Dad, can you grab the pepper from that tray?" He pointed to the service station a few feet from our table. Somewhat confused, I got up and retrieved the peppermill. When I returned, Heather was smirking at her mother. A few minutes later, Sylvia mentioned she would like more water. Again, Jackson looked at me expectantly. "Dad, would you mind? You are closer to the waiter station." I filled her water glass, increasingly uncomfortable with the dynamic, but telling myself I was just being helpful. The pattern continued throughout the meal. Jackson would snap his fingers slightly to get my attention whenever something was needed. "Dad, more bread. Dad, ask for more napkins." Each request made me feel less like a family member and more like an unpaid server. Heather's younger brother Thomas and his wife joined us halfway through the meal, having come from another engagement. They seemed surprised to find me there, suggesting they had not been told I would be attending. Thomas at least made an effort, asking about my health and whether I was enjoying retirement. Just as I began to relax slightly, Jackson launched into a story I had never heard him tell before. "So Dad used to come home covered in dirt and sawdust every day," he began, addressing the table but focusing on Lawrence. "One time, I brought some friends over after school, and he walks in looking like he had been rolling around in a construction site. My friends thought he was the maintenance man." Lawrence chuckled. "Well, I suppose there is honor in manual labor." "The best part," Jackson continued, warming to his audience, "was when he tried to explain to my friend Parker's father, who was a surgeon, about the challenges of running a business, as if selling hammers and nails was comparable to saving lives." The table erupted in laughter. Even Thomas offered a polite smile, though his eyes showed discomfort. "Remember when you came to my private school career day?" Jackson asked, though he did not wait for my response. He brought these workers' gloves for everyone, and tried to explain the difference between Phillips and flathead screwdrivers. Meanwhile, Parker's dad was showing actual surgical instruments. Each word felt like a physical blow. This was not the son I raised, the boy who once proudly told his elementary school class that his dad was a business owner who helped people build and fix things. This was someone I did not recognize, someone who found shame in the very work that had provided his privileged upbringing. Lawrence raised his wineglass in my direction. "Well, at least he is useful for something. Not everyone can afford a full waiting staff at family gatherings." More laughter followed, Heather's being the loudest. Jackson did not defend me. Instead, he joined in, adding, "Right? And he is already trained to fetch things." I sat there, my food untouched before me, feeling a cold hollow opening in my chest. I had spent decades building a life, a business, and a family, only to become the butt of a cruel joke in my own son's eyes. In that moment, I thought of Martha, and how heartbroken she would be to see what had become of our boy. "Would you excuse me for a moment?" I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need to use the restroom." As I walked away, I heard Heather whisper something that made Jackson laugh again. The sound followed me all the way to the sanctuary of the men's room, where I could finally let my mask of dignity slip, if only for a moment. The restroom at Antoine's was as elegant as the rest of the establishment, with marble countertops and individual cloth hand towels embroidered with the restaurant's logo. I locked myself in the farthest stall, leaned against the door, and closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. For a moment, I felt like I might be sick. The hollow feeling in my chest had expanded into something vast and painful. I had experienced many types of pain in my 68 years, from the physical agony of a construction accident that shattered my leg in my 20s, to the soul-crushing grief of losing Martha. But this was different. To see my own child, the person I had poured my life into raising, look at me with such disdain, was a unique kind of hurt. I sat down on the closed toilet lid, put my face in my hands, and allowed the memories to wash over me. Jackson at 5 years old, sitting on my shoulders at a Red Sox game, cheering so loud I thought my eardrums might burst. Jackson at 10, proudly showing me the birdhouse we had built together for his science project. Jackson at 16, working summers in my store, joking with customers and learning the business from the ground up. Where had that boy gone? When had he become this stranger, who found amusement in humiliating me? I thought about all the sacrifices Martha and I had made. The vacations we never took because we were reinvesting in the business. The long hours we worked to ensure Jackson could have everything we never had. The pride we felt when he graduated college, the first in either of our families to do so. Had we spoiled him? Had our efforts to give him a better life somehow robbed him of the values we had tried to instill? Or was this Heather's influence, this casual cruelty toward those deemed less worthy? I remembered a conversation with Martha during Jackson's teenage years, when he had been dismissive of a classmate from a poorer family. She had sat him down at our kitchen table and spoken with quiet intensity. "Your father and I have worked hard to give you privileges we never had," she told him. "But if those privileges make you look down on others, then we have failed as parents. True character shows in how you treat people who can do nothing for you." Jackson had seemed to understand then. He had apologized and later befriended the boy. What would Martha say now, seeing him mock the very work that had put food on his table and clothes on his back? "Love does not mean being a doormat," she had told me once, during a disagreement with her own brother. "Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is hold someone accountable." As I sat in that bathroom stall, I realized the painful truth. Jackson did not see me as his father anymore. I had become a combination of ATM and servant to him, useful for what I could provide or do, but not worthy of genuine respect. The $380,000 I had planned to give him would likely only reinforce this dynamic. It would not be received as an act of love, but as something he was entitled to, something he deserved, because he was superior. I stood up, washed my face with cold water, and looked at myself in the mirror. I saw a man who had worked hard his entire life, who had loved deeply and given generously. I saw someone who deserved better than what had happened at that table. This was not about revenge. It was not even about punishment. It was about breaking a pattern that was destroying not just our relationship but Jackson himself. Sometimes love requires difficult choices. I returned to the table with my head held high, determined to make it through the remainder of the evening with dignity. For the next hour, I observed my son as if seeing him for the first time. I noticed how he preened under Lawrence's approving nods, how his eyes constantly darted to Heather for validation after each comment. I saw the hollow man he was becoming, chasing approval from people who would never truly accept him. When dinner finally ended, Jackson barely acknowledged my departure, giving me another perfunctory hug and already turning back to Lawrence before I had even stepped away. The valet brought around my sensible sedan after a parade of luxury vehicles had whisked away the rest of the party. The young man's sympathetic smile suggested he had witnessed similar scenes before. That night, I lay awake in the house that suddenly felt too empty, too quiet. The weight of my decision pressed heavily on me. Was I doing the right thing? Would withholding the money only create more distance between us? Would it accomplish anything beyond making me feel momentarily vindicated? I thought again of Martha, of her unwavering moral compass. "You cannot control how others act," she used to say. "You can only control how you respond." By dawn, I had my answer. This was not about the money itself. It was about what it represented. I could not in good conscience reward behavior that went against everything Martha and I had tried to teach our son. I would not enable his worst instincts or the person he was becoming. The decision brought me no joy, only a sad resolution. But for the first time since that humiliating dinner, I felt a sense of clarity. What I was about to do would be painful for all involved, but sometimes the most important lessons are the hardest ones to teach. As the first light of morning filtered through my bedroom curtains, I reached for my phone and made the call that would change everything. At exactly 7:30 the next morning, I called Edward, my financial advisor of 20 years. He picked up on the second ring, always an early riser like myself. "Chauncey, good morning. This is unexpected. Everything okay?" "Not really, Ed," I replied, my voice rough from lack of sleep. "I need to make some changes to my financial plans, specifically regarding the gift for Jackson." There was a brief pause. Edward knew how long I had been planning this gift, how important it was to me to fulfill this dream Martha and I had shared. "Are you sure? The transfer is already set up for next week's deposit on his birthday." "I am certain," I said. "I need to cancel the transfer completely. Today." I explained what had happened at dinner the previous night, trying to keep the emotion out of my voice, but not entirely succeeding. Edward listened without interrupting, one of the qualities I had always appreciated about him. "I understand," he said when I finished. "Legally, it is straightforward since the transfer has not been executed. The money remains yours. I can cancel it immediately." "Thank you, and I would like to make some additional changes." For the next 30 minutes, we discussed the new arrangement. Half of the $380,000 would be donated to Boston Memorial Hospital's oncology department, where Martha had received treatment. I wanted to establish a small fund to help families with the non-medical expenses that come with cancer treatment, things insurance does not cover, like transportation, childcare, and accommodation for family members, things that had added stress during an already impossible time for us. The other half would go into a trust for any future grandchildren, structured in a way that Jackson could not access it directly. If he never had children, It would eventually go to the same hospital fund. Are you sure about this? Edward asked again, as we finalized the details. Once the donation is processed, it cannot be undone. I am sure, I said, feeling the weight of the decision but also a strange sense of peace. Martha would have approved. After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and began drafting a letter to Jackson. This was perhaps the hardest part. I wanted to explain my decision without sounding vindictive. I wanted him to understand this came from a place of love and concern, not anger, though I certainly felt that too. I wrote and discarded 3 versions before finding the right words. Dear Jackson, by the time you read this, you will likely already know that the financial gift your mother and I had planned for your 35th birthday will not be coming. This decision was not made lightly or in haste. Last night at dinner, I saw clearly what our relationship has become. I saw how you view me now, not as the father who loved and raised you, but as someone beneath you, someone to be mocked and used rather than respected. This is not about the specific acts of disrespect, though they were plentiful and painful. It is about the person you are becoming, someone your mother and I tried very hard not to raise. I remember teaching you to ride a bike in our driveway, your small hands gripping the handlebars, while I ran alongside, ready to catch you if you fell. I remember helping you with your college applications, both of us nervous about your future. I remember the pride in your eyes when you got your first paycheck from working at our store, how you insisted on taking your mother and me out for ice cream to celebrate, though the check would barely cover it. That is the son I raised. A boy who understood the value of hard work, who respected others regardless of their status, who was grateful for what he had, rather than entitled to what he did not. The money your mother and I saved for you over the years has been redirected. Half has been donated to Boston Memorial in your mother's name, to help families facing the same challenges we did during her illness. The other half has been placed in trust for any children you may have someday. I hope when that day comes, you will have rediscovered the values that seem to have been lost. This is not a punishment, though it may feel that way. It is a wake-up call. Money cannot buy character or genuine happiness, as I fear you are discovering in your new life. What matters at the end of a life are the relationships we build, the kindness we show, the integrity with which we live. I will always be your father. I will always love you. And I will always be here if you want to find your way back to the man your mother and I raised you to be. With love despite everything, Dad. I read the letter twice, sealing it before I could reconsider. Then I drove to Jackson's building, a luxury high-rise in Back Bay, with a uniformed doorman and marble lobby. I asked the doorman to ensure Jackson received the envelope, tipping him generously to guarantee its delivery. As I walked back to my car, I felt no triumph, no vindication, only a profound sadness for what had been lost. But beneath that sadness was something else, something that felt like the faint stirring of self-respect. For the first time since Martha died, I had stood up for myself, for the values we shared, for the legacy we wanted to leave. I did not know what would happen next, how Jackson would react, or if this would irreparably damage our already strained relationship. But as I drove home through the familiar streets of Boston, I felt a strange sense of lightness, as if a burden I had not even recognized had been lifted from my shoulders. Martha would have understood. More than that, she would have approved. That knowledge carried me through the uncertainty of the days to come. The fallout came swiftly and explosively. Jackson called the very next morning, his voice oscillating between rage and disbelief. "What the hell is this letter, Dad? Some kind of sick joke?" He did not wait for an answer before continuing. "I just checked my account. Where is the money?" The banker said there was supposed to be a transfer. I took a deep breath, grateful I had rehearsed this conversation in my mind. "There is no joke, Jackson. As I explained in the letter, I have decided to redirect those funds." "You cannot do that." His voice rose to a shout. "That money was promised to me. We have already made plans for it. Do you have any idea what this does to us?" "The money was never promised to you," I replied, keeping my tone even. "It was a gift your mother and I planned, but never disclosed to you. A gift I have chosen to withhold given recent developments in our relationship. Because of a stupid dinner? Are you serious? You are throwing away our relationship over some perceived slight?" His characterization of the previous night as a mere slight rather than the profound humiliation, it was only confirmed I had made the right decision. Our relationship changed long before last night, Jackson. The dinner simply made it impossible for me to ignore any longer. You have come to see me as someone beneath you, someone to be used rather than respected. "This is about Heather, is not it?" he accused. "You have never liked her. You have been jealous of her family from day one. This has nothing to do with Heather, and everything to do with you." the choices you have made, the person you are becoming. I heard muffled voices on his end. Then Heather came on the line, her voice sharp with contempt. Listen here, Chauncey. This is absolutely unacceptable. That money was earmarked for our new house down payment. We have already begun the purchasing process based on your promise. Do you understand you are jeopardizing our future? I made no promises to you, Heather, I said. And I find it interesting that Jackson apparently told you about a gift he himself did not know was coming. She sputtered for a moment, before Jackson took the phone back. You will regret this, he said, his voice cold in a way I had never heard before. When you are old and alone, do not expect me to be there. I am already old, I replied softly. And I have been alone since your mother died. But I would rather be alone with my integrity than surrounded by people who do not respect me. He hung up without another word. An hour later, my phone rang again. This time, it was Lawrence Thornton, Heather's father. His tone was condescending but controlled. The voice of a man accustomed to getting his way through intimidation, cloaked in civility. Chauncey, I think we need to discuss this situation like reasonable men. Jackson and Heather are very upset. I understand they are upset, Lawrence. But this is a private matter between my son and me. When it affects my daughter's well-being, it becomes my concern, he countered. Perhaps you are not aware of the commitments they have already made based on this expected gift. They put a deposit down on a property in Beacon Hill, non-refundable. That was premature on their part, given that Jackson had no knowledge of this gift until yesterday, when he apparently expected it to simply appear in his account. Lawrence's voice hardened slightly. Let me be frank. This vengeful behavior does not reflect well on you. It makes you appear petty and vindictive. Is that really how you want Jackson to remember you? The manipulation was so transparent, it almost made me laugh. I am curious, Lawrence. If someone treated your daughter the way Jackson treated me at dinner, would you reward them with a small fortune? There was a telling pause before he replied. We all have bad days, Chauncey. Holding grudges helps no one. This is not about a grudge. It is about values and consequences. Jackson needs to understand that how he treats people, especially family, has real implications. So this is meant to be some sort of life lesson? His tone was openly derisive now. At his age, character development does not have an expiration date, I said. Now, unless you have something else to discuss, I need to get on with my day. I ended the call before he could respond, something I suspect few people had dared to do to Lawrence Thornton. Over the next several weeks, the pressure campaign continued. Jackson and Heather told family members and mutual friends a distorted version of events, painting me as a bitter old man who had vindictively withdrawn financial support over a minor slight. Some believed them without question, including my sister-in-law Patricia, who called to tell me how disappointed Martha would be in my behavior. Others were more measured in their response. My nephew David, who had attended the wedding and witnessed the dynamic between Jackson and his new in-laws, expressed his support. Uncle Chauncey, you have always been more than generous with Jackson. If he cannot treat you with basic respect, why should you bankroll his lifestyle? My oldest friend Gerald, who had known Jackson since birth, invited me to lunch at our usual diner. Over meatloaf specials, he shared his perspective. I have watched that boy change over the past couple of years, he said, shaking his head. Martha would be heartbroken. You did the right thing, Chauncey. Maybe this will be the wake-up call he needs. I hope so, I replied. But I am not holding my breath. Despite this support, the situation took its toll. I found myself avoiding social gatherings where I might encounter people who had heard Jackson's version of events. I stopped going to the Sunday service at our family church, after overhearing whispers when I entered. My world contracted, becoming smaller and quieter. There were moments of doubt, usually in the pre-dawn hours when the house felt particularly empty. Had I overreacted? Had I irrevocably damaged my relationship with my only child? Would Martha truly have approved of my decision? Or was I just telling myself that for comfort? But then I would remember the look in Jackson's eyes as he laughed at Lawrence's joke about me being useful as a waiter. I would recall the son I had raised and contrast him with the man he had become, and I would know, painful as it was, that I had done the right thing. Some lessons can only be taught through difficult consequences. 3 weeks after the dinner, I received a formal-looking envelope in the mail. Inside was a notice that Jackson and Heather had been forced to withdraw their offer on the Beacon Hill property. The letter was clearly meant to make me feel guilty, but it had the opposite effect. It confirmed that they had been counting on money they had no guarantee of receiving, money Jackson did not even know existed until recently. It revealed a sense of entitlement that troubled me deeply. As May turned to June and then July, The angry calls and messages gradually stopped. A silence fell between Jackson and me, a chasm that seemed too wide to bridge. I continued my quiet life, volunteering at the community center, having coffee with Gerald twice a week, maintaining my garden as Martha had loved to do. I lived with the ache of estrangement, but also with the quiet dignity of someone who had refused to be devalued. What I did not expect was the visit that came on a warm August afternoon, nearly 3 months after that fateful dinner at Antoine's. I was deadheading roses in my front garden when a silver Audi pulled up to the curb. I recognized it as belonging to Thomas, Heather's younger brother. We had only met a handful of times, most recently at that disastrous dinner, and I could not imagine what would bring him to my door. He approached somewhat hesitantly, dressed casually in khakis and a polo shirt, looking less polished than he had at Antoine's. "Mr. Walsh," he said, using my proper name unlike his father had ever bothered to do. "I hope I am not intruding. I was in the neighborhood and thought I might stop by." "Not at all," I replied, brushing soil from my hands. "Would you like to come in for some iced tea?" He followed me into the kitchen, glancing around at the modest but well-maintained home where Jackson had grown up. I poured 2 glasses of tea and set out some cookies, Martha's recipe that I still baked occasionally, mostly for the comfort of the familiar routine. "These are delicious," Thomas said after trying one. "Homemade?" "My wife's recipe," I confirmed. "Now, I assume this is not a social call. What brings you here, Thomas?" He looked down at his glass for a moment before meeting my eyes. "I wanted to apologize for what happened at dinner that night. The way you were treated was inexcusable. I should have said something." His words surprised me. "Thank you. But you were not the one treating me like staff." "No, but I sat there and allowed it to happen." He shook his head. "My family can be, well, they have certain views about status that I have never been comfortable with." "I noticed you seemed uncomfortable," I acknowledged. "But why come tell me this now?" Thomas hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Because you should know that what you did had consequences beyond what you might have intended, and because I think you deserve to know the truth." Over the next hour, Thomas revealed things about Jackson and Heather's situation that shocked even me. They were not planning to use the money for a house down payment, as they had claimed. They were nearly $250,000 in debt, a combination of luxury purchases, expensive vacations, and stock market losses from Jackson trying to impress Lawrence with his investing acumen. "They have been living far beyond their means," Thomas explained, "trying to keep up with my parents and their social circle. The money you were going to give them was meant to clear their debts and allow them to continue the facade." "Jackson never mentioned any financial troubles," I said, stunned by the revelation. "He always gave the impression they were doing very well. That was the point of the facade. Heather would never admit to our parents that they were struggling, and Jackson seemed determined to prove he belonged in their world, no matter the cost." Thomas went on to explain that Heather had actually bragged to him about the expected windfall, telling him weeks before the dinner that her father-in-law was finally going to be useful with a substantial gift they would be receiving. "I was uncomfortable with how she talked about you," Thomas admitted, "but I never expected it would be so blatant at dinner. When I saw how they treated you." He trailed off, shaking his head. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Surely this puts you in a difficult position with your sister." "Heather and I have never been close," he said with a shrug. "We have different values. I joined my father's firm because it was expected, but I volunteer at a nonprofit on weekends teaching financial literacy to low-income families. That is what actually matters to me." He took another sip of tea before continuing. "I guess I wanted you to know that what you did, while painful, might have been the best thing for Jackson in the long run. He needs to find his way back to reality." After Thomas left, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, processing everything he had told me. The debt, the planned deception, the calculation behind what I had thought was merely thoughtless cruelty. It was a lot to absorb. 2 weeks later, fate brought another unexpected development. I was at my regular coffee shop downtown when I looked up to see Jackson standing at the counter. He had not noticed me yet, giving me a moment to observe him undetected. He looked different somehow. His designer clothes had been replaced by a simple button-down and jeans. The expensive watch was gone from his wrist. But the most noticeable change was in his posture, less puffed up with artificial confidence. He turned and saw me, freezing momentarily before walking over to my table. Up close, I could see the strain on his face, new lines around his eyes that had not been there 3 months ago. "Dad," he said, his voice lacking the entitled edge I had grown accustomed to hearing. "Mind if I sit down?" I gestured to the empty chair across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "I did not expect to see you here," I finally said. "I thought you preferred those fancy coffee places in Back Bay." He gave a small, humorless laugh. Yeah, well, things change. How have you been? I asked, genuinely curious. He shrugged. Honestly, not great. I got laid off last month. Downsizing, they called it. I am sorry to hear that. And I was, despite everything. No father wants to see his child struggle. Are you? He looked skeptical. After what happened, I would think you would be glad to see me taken down a peg. I have never wanted to see you suffer, Jackson. I wanted you to remember who you are, who we raised you to be. Those are very different things. He nodded slowly, looking down at his coffee cup. Heather left, he said abruptly. When the money did not come through, and then I lost my job. She said she had not signed up for financial difficulties. Though I had suspected something like this might happen based on what Thomas had told me, hearing it confirmed still came as a shock. I am sorry, I said again, meaning it. Are you? He asked again. But this time there was no bitterness in his voice, only genuine curiosity. Yes, I said. Not because I think she was good for you, but because I know what it is like to lose someone you love. It is never easy, regardless of the circumstances. We talked for a few more minutes about neutral topics, the weather, the Red Sox recent losing streak, before Jackson said he needed to go. As he stood to leave, he hesitated. I have been doing a lot of thinking lately, he said, not quite meeting my eyes, about a lot of things. I nodded but did not press him. This brief, awkward conversation was more than I had expected 3 months ago. It was a start, however small. Take care of yourself, Jackson, I said. You too, Dad, he replied, the word dad sounding different than it had in years, less like an obligation and more like what it was meant to be. As I watched him walk away, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Sadness for his struggles, concern for his future, but also a cautious hope that perhaps, just perhaps, this difficult season might lead him back to the values that mattered. 6 months after that disastrous dinner at Antoine's, I received a letter. The envelope had no return address, but I recognized Jackson's handwriting immediately. For several minutes, I simply held it, afraid of what it might contain, yet hopeful in a way I had not allowed myself to be for months. Finally, I opened it and began to read. Dear Dad, I have started this letter a dozen times over the past few weeks, struggling to find the right words. How do you apologize for becoming someone you do not even recognize yourself? How do you make amends for hurting the one person who has always been there for you? The truth is, I cannot undo what I did. I cannot take back the disrespect I showed you, not just at that dinner, but for years before it. I cannot erase the entitled, arrogant person I became, but I can acknowledge it. I can own it, and I can commit to changing it. These past months have been the hardest of my life, but also the most clarifying. Losing the money, my job, my marriage, my status, all of it stripped away the facade I had been living behind. What was left was someone I did not much like, someone Mom would have been ashamed of, someone you rightly refused to enable. I have been seeing a therapist. Actually, I have been going to a community mental health center since I can no longer afford private therapy. The irony is not lost on me. My therapist has helped me see how I was seeking validation from people who only valued what I could project, not who I actually was. I was trying so hard to be accepted by Heather's family that I rejected my own, rejected the values you and Mom raised me with, rejected myself. I do not expect forgiveness, and I am not writing to ask for financial help. I am working again, not in marketing, but as an assistant manager at a hardware store. The owner reminds me a little of you, actually. The pay is modest, but it covers the rent on my new apartment. It is small, nothing like the luxury condo I had with Heather, but it is mine, and I am paying for it honestly. If you are willing, I would like to meet, not to ask for anything, just to talk. To begin, perhaps, to find our way back to the relationship we once had. I understand if you are not ready. I will respect whatever boundaries you need. With love and genuine remorse, Jackson. I read the letter 3 times, emotions washing over me in waves. There was pain in revisiting the memories, but also something else, something that felt like the first fragile seedling of hope pushing through hard soil. I called him that same day. We arranged to meet not at Antoine's or any of the upscale places he once frequented, but at a simple diner halfway between our homes. The kind of place we used to go for Saturday morning breakfast when he was a boy. I arrived first and took a booth near the back. When Jackson walked in, the physical changes I had glimpsed at the coffee shop months before were even more pronounced. He had lost weight, and the designer haircut had grown out, But the most significant change was in his eyes. Clearer somehow, more present. "Dad," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. "Thank you for meeting me." "Thank you for your letter," I replied. "It could not have been easy to write." "Not as hard as living with what I became," he said quietly. We ordered coffee, and for a few minutes, we just sat in silence. Not the tense, awkward silence of our last encounter, but something more contemplative, each of us gathering our thoughts. "I want you to know," Jackson finally said, "that I understand why you canceled the gift. You were right to do it. I was so far off track, so lost in trying to be someone I thought I wanted to be, that I had become unrecognizable, even to myself." "What happened?" I asked. "When did things start to change?" He considered the question, stirring his coffee absently. "It was gradual. After Mom died, I felt so unmoored. Then I met Heather, and her family seemed so solid, so sure of themselves and their place in the world. I wanted that certainty, that belonging. I started to see your values, your work, your life, through their eyes instead of my own. And now? Now I see it all differently. I remember going with you to job sites when I was a kid, watching how you treated everyone, from the newest apprentice to the oldest master tradesman, with the same respect. I remember how proud I was to tell my friends that my dad built things, fixed things, made things work. Somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what really mattered." Our conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, delving into painful truths but also rediscovering the connection we had once shared. Jackson told me about his new job, his small apartment, the community service he had begun doing at a local shelter. I shared stories about his mother that he had never heard, about our early struggles and joys, about the values that had guided our lives. When the subject of the money finally arose, I explained what I had done with it. "Half went to establish the Martha Walsh Family Support Fund at Boston Memorial," I told him. "It helps families with expenses while their loved ones are in cancer treatment. The other half is in trust for any children you might have someday." To my surprise, Jackson's eyes filled with tears. "The hospital fund is perfect," he said. "Mom would have loved that. She was always slipping $20 bills to the other patients' families in the waiting room when she thought no one was looking." "I know," I smiled at the memory. "She said no one should have to choose between being with their loved one and keeping the lights on at home." "And the trust?" he asked. "I might not have children, you know. Then the money will eventually go to the hospital fund as well," I explained. "But I have not given up hope of grandchildren someday." Jackson nodded, understanding the implicit message. I had not given up on him, on his future. "I am not asking you to release the trust," he said firmly. "I need to make my own way now. But thank you for thinking of my future children, even when I was at my worst." As we prepared to leave, Jackson hesitated before asking, "Would you like to come to dinner at my apartment next weekend? Nothing fancy, just pasta. I am learning to cook." The invitation, so simple, yet so meaningful, touched me deeply. "I would like that very much," I said. Over the following months, our relationship began to heal. It was not instant or easy. There were difficult conversations, old hurts that needed to be addressed, trust that needed to be rebuilt. But each small step brought us closer to the father and son we had once been, though changed by our experiences. Jackson found a better job eventually, still in retail management but with a company that valued his work ethic and natural ability to connect with customers. He moved to a slightly larger apartment, but maintained his more modest lifestyle, saving rather than spending extravagantly. 6 months after our first meeting at the diner, he invited me and several others over for dinner. Gerald was there, along with Thomas, who had become a surprising friend to Jackson, and a few of Jackson's new coworkers. It was a simple gathering in his modest apartment, everyone crammed around a table Jackson had found at a second-hand store and refinished himself. I watched as my son moved about the small kitchen, serving his guests with genuine care and attention. There was no performance to it, no attempt to impress, just the authentic desire to make others comfortable and welcome. As he placed a plate in front of me, our eyes met, and I saw in his the son I had raised return to me. Later, as the evening was winding down, Jackson raised his glass in a toast. "To my father," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion, "who had the courage to teach me the hardest lesson I ever needed to learn, who loved me enough to let me fall, so I could remember how to stand on my own." As the others raised their glasses, I felt a fullness in my heart I had not experienced since Martha was alive. The journey had been painful, the lessons difficult, but we had found our way back to what mattered most, the authentic bond between father and son, built on mutual respect and genuine love. True wealth is not measured in bank accounts or possessions, but in the courage to stand by your values and the wisdom to recognize what truly matters. Sometimes the greatest gift is not what you give, but what you have the courage to withhold, trusting that the momentary pain will lead to lasting growth. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision out of love, even knowing it might cause pain? Do you think what I did was right, or would you have handled it differently? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life experiences. Every family has its struggles, but it is how we respond to them that defines us. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you the wisdom to know when to give and when to hold back in your own relationships.